Imagine walking into, like, a hospital emergency room on a Friday night, right? And it is just absolute chaos.
Oh, absolutely. Total gridlock.
Yeah, and right there at the front desk is this one incredibly skilled triage nurse,
Mhm.
just one, and they are taking vitals, figuring out who just has a sprained ankle, who needs stitches, and, who is actually having a full-blown cardiac event.
Right. I mean, they're the anchor of the whole operation. A healthcare system literally cannot function without that initial triage point, right?
Exactly.
Directing the flow of care, making those split-second high-stakes decisions.
Yes, exactly. But then imagine the hospital administrator comes down to the desk and says, hey, you're doing a great job managing this waiting room of 200 people, but we also need you to scrub in and perform long-term physical therapy on a patient in hallway 3.
Oh, wow.
Right. Oh, and when you're done with that, can you also run the cafeteria and handle all the insurance billing for the day?
I mean, the system would collapse instantly.
Yeah.
The nurse would burn out by Tuesday. And, well, the patients wouldn't get anything resembling adequate care.
It would be a total disaster. But that exact dynamic, that impossible demand, is happening right now, like every single day inside our education system.
Yeah, it really is.
So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are thrilled you're joining us. Today, we are taking a really close look at a document detailing a program called MentalSpace School.
Right, the K-12 Mental Health Support Program.
Exactly. It's currently operating in Georgia schools. And our mission for this deep dive is to uncover how we might actually solve the invisible crisis happening in our schools, this massive mental health bottleneck, without completely burning out the staff we already have in the building.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we really need to start with the sheer impossible math of the modern school counselor.
Yeah, the math is really where the systemic failure becomes undeniable, because we aren't talking about dedicated professionals just, having a busy season.
Right.
We are looking at a structural impossibility here. So, looking at the data from the source document, the American School Counselor Association actually has a specific recommendation. They say the safe effective ratio is one counselor for every 250 students.
Which, if you think about it, is still a massive caseload.
It is.
I mean, managing the academic and emotional trajectory of 250 developing human beings, that is a heavy lift for one person,
Huh.
even under the best conditions.
Oh, for sure. But the national average is sitting at 1 to 385.
Wow.
And in Georgia, specifically in a lot of the rural districts highlighted in our source material, that ratio balloons to an astronomical 1 to 500. Or even worse,
It's just staggering.
you have one adult responsible for 500 kids. And the source document details the reality of that job. It is a laundry list that honestly defies logic.
It really does.
If you are a school counselor, you are handling crisis intervention. You are doing academic scheduling, course corrections, college prep, financial aid guidance, career readiness. You are balancing all the 504s and IEPs.
Yeah, and you're managing parent conferences, investigating bullying incidents, tracking down chronically absent students, handling, severe behavioral referrals,
Right.
and often you're providing the initial grief support when a student loses a family member.
And as if that isn't enough to fill, a 50-hour week, they are frequently thrown into lunchroom duty, or they're asked to cover classes as a substitute teacher because of staffing shortages.
And if we look at the post-pandemic context, the baseline of this job has fundamentally shifted.
Oh, absolutely.
Because on top of the administrative, academic, and behavioral duties, counselors are now facing a literal tidal wave of severe mental health crises.
Yeah, the source notes a massive sustained rise in student anxiety, depression, trauma, and suicidal ideation.
Right, so they aren't just directing traffic anymore. They're trying to catch kids who are in free fall.
Which naturally brings us back to that ER analogy. They are being asked to manage a waiting room of 500 people while somehow performing long-term physical therapy in the hallway. But I want to play devil's advocate for a second here, because these school counselors often hold master's degrees, right?
Yes, they do.
They are deeply trained professionals in counseling and psychology. So why can't they just restructure their weeks, block out a few hours, and actually do the deep therapy themselves?
That is the exact core misunderstanding that most administrators and, frankly, the general public completely miss.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's not about a lack of skill or a lack of education on the school counselor's part. It's about the fundamental difference in the actual clinical roles.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, school counselors are specifically trained as generalists. Their role is designed to be broad, immediate, and systemic.
Ah, I see.
They triage crises, they connect students and families to outside resources, and they provide brief, supportive, solution-focused counseling. They are the frontline responders.
But isn't therapy just, talking? Like, if a counselor can talk a kid down from a panic attack in the hallway, what is fundamentally different about a 50-minute clinical session?
It's the difference between applying a tourniquet and performing reconstructive surgery.
Wow. Okay, that puts it in perspective.
Right. Ongoing clinical therapy things like systematically processing severe complex trauma or utilizing cognitive behavioral therapy for major depressive disorder,
Mm-hmm.
that is an entirely different discipline.
Right, right.
And implementing evidence-based interventions over a span of months requires specialized clinical licenses. We're talking about licensed clinical social workers, licensed professional counselors, licensed marriage and family therapists.
Okay, so a totally different credential.
Exactly. And crucially, it requires sustained, dedicated time. A structured, uninterrupted 50-minute session every single week where the clinician has the mental bandwidth to focus solely on that one patient's psychological architecture.
And the source pulls out this incredibly striking detail about what happens when you blur those lines in a school environment. Because of those 1 to 500 ratios we talked about, the counselor literally cannot guarantee 50 uninterrupted minutes. So a student who desperately needs a structured clinical environment to process a traumatic event, they end up getting like 10 rushed minutes in a hallway or an office between classes.
And when you try to compress trauma processing into a 10-minute window before the bell rings, you are essentially opening a psychological wound and then sending the kid to algebra class before you can close it back up.
Oh my gosh, that's a terrifying image.
It's a Band-Aid on a profound hemorrhage.
Hmm?
And the text points out two very grim systemic outcomes of this dynamic. First, the counselor inevitably breaks down.
Of course.
They're carrying immense secondary trauma, they know they aren't providing adequate care, and the liability is enormous. So they leave the profession entirely. National attrition rates for school counselors are staggering right now for this exact reason.
And obviously, the second outcome is that the student doesn't get better. I mean, 10 minutes between bells isn't therapy.
No, it's not.
So the root mental health issues don't get resolved. They just compound, manifesting as behavioral issues, failing grades, or worse.
Which raises an important question. How do schools provide that deep, necessary clinical care without demanding that the school counselor act as both the generalist administrator and the specialized trauma therapist?
Because we clearly need the counselor doing the triage, managing the academic prep, handling the day-to-day building crises. We literally cannot afford to lose them.
Exactly.
And that is exactly what the MentalSpace School partnership model attempts to solve, right? It proposes a system designed to extend the school's capabilities, not replace the counselor.
Yes, it's about building specialized capacity without creating redundancy.
So let's put ourselves in the building and walk through how this workflow actually operates.
Okay.
Say a counselor, through their normal triage, identifies a student who is exhibiting severe school avoidance and extreme anxiety. What actually happens next under this model?
Well, the counselor remains the hub of the wheel. They're the one who initiates a warm handoff. They send a referral to the MentalSpace School intake coordinator. And the crucial mechanism here is speed.
Right.
The text highlights a same-day response protocol.
Which is wildly different from the traditional community referral model. I mean, usually a counselor hands a parent a printed list of local therapists, and the family ends up sitting on a wait list for like 6 to 8 weeks just for an intake appointment.
Exactly. The same-day response interrupts the crisis cycle before it can escalate.
That's huge.
From there, a dedicated therapist reaches out to the family to get consent and establish the clinical baseline.
And then the actual therapy happens via secure telehealth, usually during a designated non-instructional school period, like study hall or lunch.
Yes.
But I have to ask, doing deep clinical therapy during study hall, does telehealth really work for a K-12 student?
It's a valid question.
Right. Doesn't putting a kid in front of a screen for therapy defeat the purpose of human connection, or at least run the risk of immense stigma? Like, don't the other kids notice someone slipping away to a virtual therapy room every Tuesday?
Those are the exact concerns that derail poorly implemented programs. But what's fascinating here is how this model vigorously protects the therapeutic relationship.
Okay, how so?
First, it is a dedicated therapist team assigned specifically to that school. It is not a random call center,
Oh, that makes a difference.
right? It is not a rotating cast of telehealth workers where the student has to re-explain their trauma to a new stranger every week. It's the same clinician, building a consistent, trusting relationship over time.
Okay, so the consistency is there. But what about the physical execution in the building? Like, where do they go?
Schools typically designate a private, secure space, maybe an unused office or a partitioned area in the library where the student can log in privately. As for the stigma, stepping out during a flexible period like study hall or lunch is far less disruptive and far less visible than a student having a public meltdown in the hallway or constantly being called down to the main office over the loudspeaker.
That makes total sense. And what does this mean for the counselor? Because if the counselor just, tosses the kid over a virtual wall to a telehealth therapist, doesn't that create a silo where the school has no idea what's going on with the student?
It would, which is why the integration of data is so critical. The model relies on FERPA and HIPAA compliant coordination.
Okay, but the privacy laws.
Right. This means the clinical therapist and the school counselor have a secure, legally compliant channel to share necessary updates. The counselor isn't getting all the granular, confidential details of the trauma processing, but they do receive high-level updates on the student's progress.
Oh, so they're not left in the dark.
Not at all. Furthermore, there are joint crisis protocols. If a student discloses active self-harm during a virtual session, the clinician can immediately trigger a coordinated response with the counselor who is physically in the building.
So the counselor is still in the loop, but they actually regain their time.
Exactly.
They aren't trying to squeeze in heavy clinical work between lunch duty and a 504 meeting.
They regain their time, and they drastically reduce their professional liability.
Oh, true.
Trying to provide clinical therapy without the proper capacity, setting, or specialized licensing is a massive legal and ethical liability for a school district. Plus, the counselor actually gains a clinical colleague.
Like a partner.
Yeah, they have a licensed therapist attached to their building who they can consult with when a student presents with a highly complex mental health need.
That feels like a massive paradigm shift. It's essentially building a specialized telehealth annex into the school overnight.
It really is.
And the source points out they don't just stop at the student's study hall session. The net of care is surprisingly wide.
Very wide.
This program provides 247 crisis access, so if a student is spiraling at 2 a.m. on a Saturday, they have an immediate clinical lifeline. They also offer family counseling, parent support groups, and staff wellness initiatives.
Because by treating the ecosystem around the student, you are acknowledging that a child's mental health does not exist in a vacuum.
Definitely.
If a student is dealing with profound anxiety, treating just the student for 50 minutes a week while ignoring the family dynamics or the school environment will yield really limited results.
Now, we've talked a lot about the human mechanics, right? How this workflow preserves the sanity of the counselor and gets the student specialized care.
Right.
But let's look at this from the systemic level, because school districts are ultimately driven by budgets, mandates, and hard metrics. If I'm a superintendent, why do I care about this beyond the moral imperative?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the secondary ripple effects of untreated mental health are the things that completely destroy district metrics and budgets.
And the hard numbers in this source document really jump out. When you take the clinical burden off the generalist counselor and give students dedicated in-school teletherapy, they track an 89% improvement in attendance and a 76% improvement in grades.
We really need to unpack why those two specific metrics jump so dramatically.
Yeah, please do.
It goes back to the mechanism of school avoidance. When a student is suffering from severe, untreated anxiety or depression, it often manifests as somatic symptoms, stomach aches, headaches, sheer panic, which leads to them missing school.
Okay, yeah.
And when they miss school, they fall behind academically. Falling behind creates more anxiety, which creates more truancy. It is a vicious compounding cycle.
Wow, yeah.
By intercepting the anxiety with clinical therapy physically located within the school day, you break that cycle.
Yeah.
The student is present, their cognitive load is freed up, and naturally their grades improve.
That makes perfect sense. And alongside that, they cite a 92% reduction in student anxiety and an 85% family satisfaction rate.
Huge numbers.
But I want to circle back to the administration's viewpoint. Because even with those incredible numbers, counselor turnover is still a massive issue.
It is the #1 HR cost in many school districts.
Really? The #1?
Yes. Recruiting, hiring, and continually training new counselors because your current ones are burning out and quitting is incredibly expensive and destabilizing for a school culture.
I can imagine.
By preserving the generalist counselors you already have and preventing that burnout, this model saves districts immense resources on the back end.
I hear that, but you know exactly what a skeptical school board's going to say.
What's that?
This all sounds amazing, but school budgets are frozen. We are already cutting art and music. Who pays for this massive telehealth infrastructure? Is this just another unfunded mandate we have to figure out?
And that's a reality. The logistics and the funding models are always the gatekeepers in public education.
Right.
If a program isn't financially sustainable, it honestly doesn't matter how good the clinical outcomes are.
So let's look at the guardrails MentalSpace has built. First, on the administrative side, they guarantee a 99.5% platform uptime, and they only use Georgia-licensed clinicians.
Very important for compliance.
They also emphasize culturally responsive and diverse clinical staff, which we know is crucial for students to actually engage with therapy. But the really fascinating part is how this aligns with state law. The source mentions a looming deadline of July 2026 for Georgia's HB 268.
Ah, yes. HB 268 is a massive administrative headache for school leaders.
What does it do?
It mandates very specific, rigorous suicide and violence prevention protocols. And most districts do not have the internal clinical expertise to build those protocols from scratch.
Right.
Nor do they have the budget to hire a fleet of external consultants to do it for them.
So having this dedicated crisis intervention and clinical team already integrated into the school directly supports that state mandate. It completely takes the pressure off the district to invent a compliance program out of thin air.
Exactly. But the funding mechanism is the real linchpin here.
Right. How does a financially strapped rural district afford this? Well, the document points out that the budget impact is minimal and often completely non-existent for the school district itself.
Wait.
Yeah, and the reason why is brilliant. MentalSpace is fully integrated into the existing healthcare infrastructure. They are in-network with Medicaid.
Oh, wow. That changes the entire conversation.
It really does. It
Yeah.
means it is a $0 cost for students who are on Medicaid.
That's incredible.
And on top of that, they're tapped into basically every major commercial network. We're talking Blue Cross, Blue Shield, Cigna, Aetna, United Healthcare, Humana, and, state-specific plans like Peach State and CareSource and Amerigroup.
Okay, so they are shifting the financial burden away from the school's general education fund
Yes,
and placing it where it actually belongs, on the healthcare system,
exactly.
which is really the only logical way a program like this becomes sustainable.
Yeah.
You simply cannot ask a public school district to shoulder the entire financial burden of specialized psychiatric and clinical care.
No, of course not.
They are education institutions, not hospitals. By utilizing Medicaid and commercial insurance, this model builds a bridge between healthcare funding and educational access, effectively bypassing the school's frozen budget entirely.
So bringing this all together, for you listening, whether you are an educator, a parent, or just someone fascinated by how broken systems can actually be fixed, this deep dive really highlights a profound shift in how we view support staff.
It really does.
We are redefining the modern school counselor. We are taking them from this impossible, do-it-all superhero who is constantly on the verge of quitting and returning them to their highly specialized rightful place as the master triage partner and generalist advocate.
And it proves that the answer to systemic failure isn't always to demand more resilience from our existing educators.
Right.
The answer is smart partnership. It's about building capacity by integrating outside expertise seamlessly into the student's daily environment, rather than trying to force one professional to do the job of 5.
So what does this all mean? It unlocks better, much deeper mental health care for the kids, and it preserves the careers of the educators we so desperately need to keep in our schools.
Exactly. And it leaves you with something quite profound to consider moving forward.
What's that?
Well, based on what we've seen in this document regarding those rural districts operating at astronomical 1 to 500 ratios, if highly secure, dedicated telehealth can fundamentally decouple a school's geographic location from the specialized licensed clinical resources it has access to, what else is possible?
Well, that's a great point.
Right. If we can solve the complex mental health bottleneck this way, what other vital but chronically under-resourced in-building school services are destined to be completely revolutionized by virtual partnerships next?
It really does make you wonder. I mean, we started this deep dive talking about that ER triage nurse surrounded by chaos being asked to do the impossible.
Yeah.
It turns out we didn't need the nurse to work harder, and we didn't need to replace them. We just needed to build a doorway right next to their desk, leading straight to a team of specialists ready to take the handoff. That is a system that actually works.